Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we'll revisit 6 horrific cases that once shook international public opinion, from Taiwan and Japan to Singapore and South Korea. Sources suggest these tragedies were not merely criminal cases, but also painful snapshots of human nature, desperation, and the simmering conflicts that can arise within immigrant life. We'll trace the aftermath of the mass stabbing at Taipei main station, where a lone wolf plotted to imitate past crimes in order to spread fear. The video also takes a deeper look at the tragedies faced by Vietnamese people abroad, from trainee Dam Duy Khang, who killed his teacher in Japan under financial pressure, to the heartbreak of bride Hoang, who was murdered by her husband in South Korea in front of her young child. In Singapore, we examine the case of Nguyen, killed by a neighbor after a long-running noise dispute, and the tragedy of Ngoc Giau, who became trapped in blind jealousy and alcohol-fueled conflict with her common-law partner. Finally, we cover the case of a female massage worker in Taipei who was targeted by a killer seeking to steal her property. And if you enjoy investigative true crime content and want to follow along with Vietnamese case files and upcoming cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Now, let's begin. On the late afternoon of December 19th, 2025, right in the middle of evening rush hour, thousands of people were hurrying through the entrances and exits of Taipei's main station. Suddenly, thick smoke began pouring out from exit M7 in the basement level. Seeing this, many people panicked, fearing there had been a fire in the metro system. But moments later, they were even more shocked to see a man wearing a gas mask frantically throwing strange objects onto the floor. Dense white smoke immediately billowed out from them. These turned out to be smoke bombs. With no time to understand what was happening, the crowd broke into chaos and fled in all directions. At the same time, a man in a security uniform bravely rushed forward to subdue the masked suspect. But in a split second, the attacker pulled out a long, razor-sharp knife. He stabbed the guard straight in the chest, causing him to collapse onto the floor, his uniform soaked in blood. Witnessing this, the crowd grew even more frantic. Alarm sirens rang throughout the station. In an instant, the once bustling station turned into a scene of sheer panic. Shouts of, "There's an attacker!" echoed everywhere. Passengers shoved one another as they ran for their lives, abandoning suitcases and belongings scattered across the floor. Meanwhile, the assailant vanished into the thick white smoke. At 1724, Taiwan's 119 Emergency Center received the first distress call. Less than 5 minutes later, firefighters and local police arrived on the scene. Under the dim yellow lights near exit M7 on the B1 level, they saw multiple spent smoke bomb canisters strewn across the ground, emitting a sharp chemical stench. White smoke still hung in the air, stinging everyone's eyes. Wearing gas masks, police and emergency responders rushed into the station to evacuate the crowd and search for victims. They soon found a security guard with the name badge Yujia Chang lying motionless on the floor, suffering from a stab wound to the left side of his back that had punctured his lung. By that point, he had gone into cardiac arrest, so the rescue team hurriedly placed him on a stretcher and transported him by ambulance to National Taiwan University Hospital nearby for emergency treatment. Not far away, police found another man, about 54 years old, gasping for air from smoke inhalation. He was taken to Mackay Memorial Hospital for treatment with minor injuries caused by breathing in toxic smoke. Responders also discovered 15 Molotov cocktails that had not been ignited, along with 17 M18 smoke bombs, commonly used in military simulation games, left behind at the scene. This was clear evidence that the attacker had brought an entire arsenal and intended to cause large-scale harm. In addition, a double-edged knife, about 30 centimeters long, with a blade as thick as a paratrooper's dagger, was found on the floor, covered in blood, strongly suggesting it was the weapon used in the attack. Police also recovered a black tactical vest that the attacker discarded while fleeing. It contained metal protective inserts and multiple pouches for tools. But the horror did not end there. While authorities were still processing the crime scene at the main station, only about 15 minutes after the first attack, and roughly 1 kilometer away, the S-Lite bookstore, Nanshi Shopping Center near Zhongshan MRT station, was plunged into an equally terrifying scene. Panicked calls flooded the 110 and 119 emergency lines, reporting someone swinging a knife wildly in the Nanshi shopping area. Zhongshan District Police were immediately dispatched to S-Light Nanxi on Nanjing West Road. When they arrived, they were horrified to see multiple people collapsed in pools of blood right outside the shopping center entrance. Inside, the chaos was just as severe. Hundreds of shoppers and employees screamed and fled down to lower floors. As police rushed into S-Light Nanxi, they saw unmistakable signs of a pursuit and attack stretching from the ground floor up to the 4th floor. Injured victims were scattered everywhere, the situation hanging by a thread. Without hesitation, tactical officers advanced in the direction witnesses indicated. They quickly spotted a suspicious figure in black still holding a weapon. Rapid footsteps thundered through corridors littered with shattered glass and toppled merchandise. Officers repeatedly shouted commands to surrender. The distance between them narrowed to only a few meters. The figure in black turned back for a split second, panic flashing in his eyes as he caught sight of the officers behind him. Then he sprinted toward the emergency stairwell. In a breath-stopping moment, the suspect backed toward the edge of the hallway, with the dark, yawning drop of the atrium behind him. A scream rang out, and everything seemed to freeze. When officers lunged forward, the black-clad figure had vanished from view. A heavy silence fell, broken only by urgent radio chatter and the pained groans of the injured drifting up from the floors below. The chase ended in an instant, leaving a chaotic scene and shock rippling through the entire building. The suspect's body was later found lying atop cardboard boxes in a ground floor service area with multiple fractures and no signs of life. Police quickly identified the attacker through his identification documents, found inside a wallet that had fallen near his body. He was Zhang Nguyen, 27 years old, a Taiwanese national. He wore black, military-style clothing, a tactical vest with multiple pouches, and high-top boots. Searching him, authorities seized multiple items of evidence, including a Zippo lighter, several matches, a smashed mobile phone, a hotel room key, and a wallet containing an ID card in the name of Zhang Nguyen. All identity details were immediately reported to police headquarters. And so, after hours of horror and chaos, the killing spree ended with the death of the perpetrator himself. Once it was confirmed that the main suspect had died, rescue operations moved into high gear. At the entrance of the S-Light bookstore on the 4th floor, medics found an unconscious male victim with multiple wounds to the abdomen and neck. The victim was Mr. Wang, 37 years old, a bank employee who had stopped by the bookstore after work and was tragically caught up in the attack. He was rushed to Shin Kong Hospital for emergency treatment, but despite doctors' efforts throughout the night, by 10 p.m., Mr. Wang had succumbed to his severe injuries. In addition, at least 9 injured people were reported in the S-Light area, including store, staff, and shoppers. Most of the injured had suffered slash wounds to the neck or shoulder. Notably, one injured victim was found to be HIV positive, so health authorities issued an urgent public notice calling on anyone who had come into contact with the victim's blood to visit a medical facility for testing and to receive free post-exposure medication within 72 hours. At the same time, the investigation into the motive began. The shopping center's security camera system provided police with crucial leads. It captured a man dressed in black, holding a knife, charging straight through the entrance at 1837. He slashed at a customer and a security guard right at the doorway. He then ran inside, took an elevator up to the 4th floor, where the bookstore area was quieter, and then suddenly turned back to attack people who were trying to flee. The fact that the attacks unfolded across multiple floors showed the perpetrator was extremely reckless and had planned his movements in advance. Combined with witness statements, police determined the 2 incidents at Taipei Main Station and S-Light Nanxi were likely carried out by the same attacker. Within less than 1 hour, the case became the focus of breaking news. Ambulances wailed through the Taipei night, rushing victims to the nearest hospitals. Special police units also deployed armored vehicles to lock down the Nanxi shopping center area. Then, on the night of December 19th into the early morning of December 20th, a special task force established by the Taipei City Police Department launched a full investigation. Under the direct command of Commissioner Lee Hesiho, more than 100 investigators and forensic specialists worked through the night. Their top priorities were determining whether the attacker acted alone or had accomplices and clarifying his motive. First, the suspect's identity, Zhang Nguyen, was cross-checked against police records to confirm his background and any criminal history. Police immediately realized he was not an ordinary citizen. Zhang Nguyen was born in 1998 in Taoyuan City, Taiwan. He grew up in a working-class family with no recorded history of mental illness. After graduating from high school, Zhang Nguyen joined the military as a volunteer serviceman. However, while in the armed forces, he violated discipline after being caught driving under the influence of alcohol and was discharged in 2023. From that point, his life took a completely different turn. Zhang Nguyen became estranged from his family, drifting from place to place and unable to hold a stable job for long. His family tried repeatedly to contact him and persuade him to come home, but without success. For a period, he worked as a building security guard, but soon quit. Former co-workers recall that he was withdrawn and taciturn, with eyes that always seemed vacant and dark. Another person said Zhang Nguyen barely socialized with anyone and spent all day glued to his phone, reading something. The next turning point came when Zhang Nguyen faced a legally required reserve duty summons in Taiwan, under which men remain obligated to attend periodic reserve training even after leaving active service. Instead of complying, he evaded it by constantly changing addresses, and he was eventually wanted in July of 2025. From that moment, he officially became a fugitive, living in hiding. In his belongings, police found a key to a small hostel on Nanjing West Road, right next to the Nanxi Commercial District, very close to the crime scene. When investigators checked the hostel, they learned that Zhang Nguyen had checked in on December 17th, 2 days before the attack. The hostel owner said the young man paid in cash up front for a full week, carried little luggage, often went out at night, and once asked to borrow the hostel's kitchen, possibly to heat or prepare certain items. Searching Zhang Nguyen's room, police seized multiple materials used to make incendiary devices, including metal can casings, electrical tape, matches, smoke-producing chemicals, and sawdust. This was viewed as a key clue suggesting he may have assembled Molotov cocktails and tested smoke bombs right there. Clearly, he had prepared extremely carefully for this deranged attack plan. At the same time, another investigative team searched a different room Zhang Nguyen had rented in Zhongzheng District, Taipei, near North Taipei Station in the Gongyuan neighborhood. He had registered temporary residence there starting in January of 2025. Police determined this was where the attacker had been living for months while evading the warrant. Notably, the room was located right next to a neighborhood police station, showing just how brazen Zhang Nguyen was to hide so close to authorities while being wanted. When investigators reached the scene, the rented room had been scorched and blackened by a recent fire. Based on the forensic examination, police concluded the blaze had been set by Zhang Nguyen himself on the afternoon of December 19th, just before he launched the attack at the train station. Inside, they found a burned computer hard drive, some electronic components, and chemical traces similar to those used to make Molotov cocktails. Although most items had been warped and destroyed by the fire, digital forensic specialists were still able to recover data later from the cloud storage account that Zhang Nguyen had synced with his laptop. What was found in that cloud data revealed a shocking secret about the attacker's plan. Police discovered that Zhang Nguyen had studied the case of Cheng Chie in great detail. He even wrote a note stating that Taiwanese people owe Cheng Chie an apology, implying a warped belief that society had treated the earlier killer unfairly. Most striking of all was a file Zhang Nguyen titled Operational Plan, in which he laid out a detailed route and method for the attack. He intended to imitate Cheng Chie's attack from years earlier, but on a larger scale, and instead of using only a knife, he also prepared Molotov cocktails and smoke bombs to increase casualties. The starting point he chose was Taipei Main Station, aiming to make a huge impact. This detail also mirrored Cheng Chie's 2014 attack on the Bannan Line Metro. The plan clearly listed each timed step, setting vehicles on fire, burning down his rented room, attacking Taipei Main Station, then moving on to attack the Nanxi area, and finally escaping by climbing to the roof and jumping down to a prepared landing spot. Even more terrifying, the actual route and timing of the real attack matched this plan by roughly 90%. The biggest deviation was the escape. Zhang Nguyen expected to land on a pile of cardboard boxes to absorb the impact, but he did not know the boxes had been cleared away beforehand. So he fell straight onto the hard ground and died. This showed the rampage was not impulsive, but the result of meticulous and cold-blooded preparation. The cloud data also confirmed that Jiang Nguyen acted entirely alone, with no accomplices and no terrorist organization behind him. The storage account and draft plans were created and revised multiple times by Jiang Nguyen himself, with no signs of anyone else's involvement. He had also collected extensive materials on notorious mass killings around the world, from Cheng Chie's 2014 Taipei case to Anders Breivik's 2011 attack in Norway, where the terrorists set off a bomb before carrying out a shooting, similar in concept to how Jiang Nguyen used smoke bombs to create chaos before launching his assault. From these pieces of evidence, the task force initially concluded Jiang Nguyen's motive was copycat in nature. He wanted to replicate a brutal event to take revenge on society, generate notoriety, and spread fear. He did not target any specific individual. Instead, he chose crowded locations to maximize harm. In other words, this was a lone wolf-style attack, driven by personal resentment and psychological distortion, with no ties to any extremist organization or political agenda. During the investigation, police also worked with the attacker's family. Jiang Nguyen's parents were stunned to learn their son was the perpetrator. They stated that for the past 2 years, he had barely contacted the family at all. As a result, they did not know where he was or what he was doing. The family also had not noticed any signs that he was preparing an attack, because there was no suicide note and no farewell message left behind. This further reinforced the theory that the attacker had plotted alone in the shadows, carrying a simmering hatred towards society without sharing it with anyone. Psychological profiling and data analysis also suggested that Jiang Nguyen held extreme and malicious ideas and wanted to imitate crimes to inflate a selfish ego, yet he did not appear to suffer from a mental disorder because his plan was coherent and clearly intentional. Another striking detail was that before he attacked, Jiang Nguyen carried out multiple preparatory and diversionary acts. Police determined that on the afternoon of December 19th, at about 15:54, he rode a large displacement motorcycle to Linson North Road, and the alleys numbered 159 and 119. Then went to number 75 on Chang'an East Road and set fires himself, causing 3 small blazes that burned up 2 cars and 3 motorcycles belonging to residents. His goal was to create incidents that would draw police and firefighters to other areas, thereby reducing security at the train station. In reality, the 3 back-to-back vehicle fires late that afternoon kept authorities busy responding, leaving them less focused on the central area. At 16:53, the same day, Jiang Nguyen returned to his rented room in the Nguyen neighborhood of Zhongzheng district, where he had already piled up flammable materials and then set the room on fire. Flames erupted and gutted the room, yet it seemed no one noticed in time before he left. Experts speculated that Jiang Nguyen may have wanted to destroy evidence, including his laptop, while also testing whether the fire would draw attention to him. When he saw there was no significant response from authorities, likely because the fire smoldered without spreading quickly, he decided to proceed with the main stages of his attack plan. The investigation and evidence collection continued throughout the night of December 19th and into December 20th, 2025. On December 21st, 2025, Taipei police held a press conference announcing their preliminary conclusion. Jiang Nguyen was the sole perpetrator. The terrorism angle had been ruled out, and the case was classified as a deliberate random attack carried out by an individual with grievances against society. Commissioner Li Hosiho also said investigators found no evidence of accomplices or any organization behind the incident, and emphasized that psychological analysis and the attacker's radicalization process were still ongoing. After that, the focus of the investigation shifted to supporting prosecutors in completing the case file, while also caring for the victims and their families. In total, Jiang Nguyen's brutal actions left 3 people dead and at least 11 others injured. Of all the stories, the one that broke people's hearts the most was the loss of the security guard Yu Jia Chang at Taipei Main Station. He was the one who stepped forward to stop the attacker the moment the assault began, even though he had nothing in his hands to defend himself. Tragically, that courage cost him his life. Mr. Yu passed away at the hospital at around 20:07 that same day. When his wife and daughter received the devastating news, they rushed to the hospital. Holding her husband's body, his wife sobbed, saying, "He always lived with honor and integrity. I never imagined it would end like this." The death of such a brave husband and father left immeasurable grief for his family and the community. The next day, large numbers of residents brought flowers and letters to the spot where Mr. Yu fell at the station, paying tribute to the hero of Taipei Main Station, a nickname Taiwan's media respectfully gave him. The second fatality was Xiaoyang Hong, 37 years old. He was killed outside the shopping center while waiting at a red light. The third was Wang Zihao. The victim attacked at the bookstore on the 4th floor of the building. That day, he had planned to buy a Christmas gift for his wife, only to run into the rampager. People grew even more furious at Nguyen. Because of his warped, extreme ideology, at least 3 families were left shattered. Soon after, the Taipei city government announced support measures for victims. Among them, the family of Yu Jia-cheng, recognized for his courageous actions, could receive total compensation and assistance of up to about $406,000. Mayor Wayne Cheng also personally paid his respects and posthumously honored Mr. Yu with the title of Brave Citizen, while pledging that the city would cover all funeral expenses and provide the family with legal and psychological support. For the families of Xiaoyang Hong and Wang Zihao, the city government said it was coordinating with relevant parties such as the MRT company and the S-Light Group to arrange appropriate compensation under insurance terms in the spirit of good faith agreement. In the days following the case, other agencies also launched community support programs. The Department of Health set up a trauma counseling hotline and provided free therapy services for witnesses and surviving victims. The local Department of Education also sent specialists to schools near the affected area to talk with students and help calm them. In the media, Taiwanese news outlets called this the December 19th domestic terror attack, emphasizing the horror and lasting trauma the incident caused. Many newspapers published images of the blood-soaked scene alongside headlines such as "Hellfire Smoke in the Heart of Taipei" or "A Hero and a Devil," highlighting the stark contrast between the chivalrous security guard Yu Jia-cheng and the cold-blooded killer Zhang Wen. Public outrage also raised hard questions about accountability. How could a wanted fugitive freely prepare weapons for such a long time without being discovered? How could he live calmly right next to a police station and still go unnoticed? Under public pressure, police were urged to improve emergency response procedures. Mayor Wayne Cheng ordered that armed patrols at crowded train stations, bus terminals, and shopping centers be doubled. Taipei's MRT stations immediately deployed an additional 70 on-site officers and also requested support from the Ministry of the Interior for another 85 mobile police officers. New proposals also emerged across society. Some suggested installing anti-stabbing first aid kits in public places, similar to fire safety boxes. On social media, people shared public self-defense guides, advising everyone to carry a high-powered flashlight or a personal alarm whistle for protection in case of a random attack. At 7:25 a.m. on September 24th, 2025, Singapore's emergency hotline received multiple calls in quick succession, reporting a serious fight at Block 323, Yishun Central. Minutes later, police arrived and were met with a chaotic scene. A woman and 2 men lying collapsed along the corridor on the 6th floor, surrounded by smeared bloodstains. The woman, around 30 years old, was unconscious and covered in blood. A middle-aged man still held a blood-stained knife in his hand and was injured himself. The other was a man in his 30s, clutching his abdomen and crying out in pain. The rapid response team immediately cordoned off the area and called for additional ambulances. All 3 victims were taken to the nearby Khu Tak Puat Hospital. However, the woman was pronounced dead before arriving at the hospital. The 2 men survived, but were both seriously injured. They were treated under close police supervision. Based on what officers found at the scene, it did not take long for police to identify the 66-year-old man as the main suspect in this bloody attack. But who was he, and what was his connection to the other 2 people? Most importantly, why did he attack them with such brutality? The 6th floor corridor of Block 323, Yishun Central, was immediately sealed off for investigation. At the scene, clear signs of a violent struggle were everywhere. A decorative flower vase outside the corridor had been smashed to pieces, and the surrounding walls were marked with splattered blood. On the concrete floor, a long smear of blood stretched from near the lift lobby all the way to the door of an apartment unit. Scattered around were personal items strewn across the ground: a mobile phone, a wristwatch, a set of car keys, and a single slipper. Based on the traces collected, police believe the victim was likely about to leave home when the sudden attack occurred. During the struggle, the car keys, phone, and slipper were flung away, while the wristwatch slipped off as the victim fought back. Fortunately, after speaking with nearby residents, police immediately gathered information about the victims. Neighbors recognized the unfortunate woman as Miss Tra, whose full name was Nguyen Phum Tra, 30 years old, a Vietnamese national. She was known as a friendly Vietnamese woman who often took her two young children for walks around the area each afternoon. The man of a similar age who was also injured was her husband, Mr. Lim, 33 years old, a Singaporean. The suspect was identified as Ko Ah Hui, 66 years old, who lived in the unit directly below Tra and her husband. According to accounts, she was described as a gentle, devoted mother who took diligent care of her family. Her household life had been fairly peaceful. Mr. Lim worked for a tech company, usually leaving home early in the morning and returning only after dark, while Tra managed the household, cared for the children, and handled all the domestic responsibilities. Even though she was sometimes hesitant to socialize because of language barriers, Tra was still well liked by neighbors for her gentle and polite manner. However, a shadow over that seemingly peaceful life came from a conflict with the downstairs neighbor, Ko Ah Hui, 66, and his family lived directly below her unit, and they were consistently irritated by noise coming from upstairs. Because Tra had two young, energetic children, it was sometimes unavoidable that they would run around or drop toys on the floor, creating noise for the unit below. Aware of this, she tried her best to minimize noise, laying foam mats where the children played, frequently reminding them to keep quiet, especially in the early morning and at night. Even so, with small children, noise is hard to prevent, and this made the Ko couple increasingly annoyed, even openly showing their displeasure. Tra once confided to a next-door neighbor that the conflict was making her very stressed. She also said that one time, after her child accidentally dropped a toy with a loud bang, Tra went downstairs to knock on Ko's door to apologize, but no one answered. Yet that very night, her floor began to echo with repeated loud thuds, as if someone were deliberately pounding upward from below with a broom in retaliation. From then on, Tra's family lived under prolonged tension. Upstairs, she tried to stay quiet to avoid causing trouble, while downstairs, the Ko couple would occasionally respond by banging hard on the ceiling. Even so, Tra still believed that any conflict could be resolved through dialogue and goodwill. In June 2025, she proactively submitted a request to the Community Mediation Center, hoping for an official session between the two sides to end the tension. However, Ko's side ignored the invitation, and the mediation could not take place. Refusing to give up, Tra continued reporting the situation to the estate management, and even planned to seek intervention from a community court if things did not improve. All of those efforts came from one simple wish: to end the long-running noise dispute so her small family could regain a peaceful life. Tragically, the woman's goodwill was not enough to soothe the neighbors' simmering anger. On that fateful morning, Nguyen Phum Tra became the victim of the very conflict she had tried to resolve peacefully. Neighbors in the area also confirmed that Ko Ah Hui frequently complained about noise from Tra and her husband's unit upstairs. What began as minor quarrels gradually escalated, and many residents had witnessed heated exchanges between the two sides. Those clues helped police quickly focus their investigation. Most likely, this tragedy grew out of a long-standing neighbor dispute quietly building over time before ultimately exploding into catastrophe. After the victims were taken for emergency treatment and the scene was secured, Singapore police immediately launched an investigation. Initial findings suggested this was a case stemming from a personal dispute between neighbors unrelated to robbery or terrorism. The suspect had also been taken to the hospital, so investigators focused on collecting evidence and clearly establishing the motive and exact sequence of events for prosecution. At the scene, forensic technicians collected even the smallest traces. A kitchen knife, about 20 centimeters long, soaked in blood, was found lying several meters from the victim's body. Based on the knife's location and the direction of blood spatter on the wall and floor, investigators concluded this was the weapon used to attack the victim at close range. The forensic unit quickly took blood samples from the blade and handle for DNA testing, and also checked for fingerprints on the handle to confirm the involvement of the parties. The mobile phone recovered at the scene was identified as belonging to Mr. Lim, the victim's husband. Data on the device showed that at 7:18 a.m., he attempted to call the emergency hotline, but the call was interrupted. This detail matched his later statement. When he saw Ko rushing toward him with a knife, he pulled out his phone to call the police, but before he could say anything, he was attacked. Alongside the forensic work, the investigation team interviewed surrounding witnesses. The most notable account came from Clara Ko, 28 years old, a resident on the 7th floor and the first person to discover the incident. Clara said that shortly after 7 a.m. that morning, she was awakened by very loud screaming coming up from below. She immediately ran down to the 6th floor with her father and was horrified to see her neighbor collapsed, with blood spreading across her abdomen. At the same time, Mr. Lim was struggling with an elderly man holding a knife. Mr. Lim was stabbed from behind and blood burst out, soaking the back of his shirt. But despite being seriously injured, he still tried to position himself between his wife and the attacker while pleading with neighbors to help his wife. Seeing how critical the situation was, Clara's father rushed in. Together with another male resident, he attempted to restrain the suspect and wrest the knife from his hand. Meanwhile, Clara ran back upstairs, called the police, and requested urgent assistance. At the same time, another neighbor quickly ran over, gathered the couple's 2 young children, brought them into their own home, and locked the door to keep them safe until emergency responders arrived. Beyond witness statements, police also retrieved all footage from the building's security camera system. Although the angles were limited, a camera on the 5th floor clearly captured Ko leaving his unit at around 7:20 a.m., holding a long object that looked like a knife and heading upstairs via the stairwell. Just minutes later, a 6th floor camera recorded a younger man running out of a unit in panic, pulling 2 small children along. Immediately afterward, Ko appeared in frame, still holding the knife, chasing after them with an enraged expression. Next, camera footage showed Tra rushing out to the corridor and grabbing one of her children when Ko suddenly lunged at her and slashed with the knife. Everything happened in an instant. Although the video quality was not very sharp, it was still enough to confirm that the attack unfolded as witnesses described. After gathering physical evidence, statements, and camera data, police began reviewing the relationship history between the victims and the suspect. The results showed that the dispute between the 2 families over noise issues had previously been reported to local authorities. Records show that the victim submitted a request for mediation on June 12, 2025. But the session could not proceed because Ko ignored the invitation and did not attend. In addition, a member of parliament for Nee Soon GRC confirmed that he had received feedback from Madam Ko, the suspect's wife, during a residents' Meet the People session in late July 2025. After the complaint was received, the HDB Housing Management stepped in to mediate. However, the dispute continued despite intervention by the Community Mediation Center. The records also show that the matter was later referred to the Community Disputes Resolution Tribunals in August 2025 and was awaiting a hearing date. These details indicate the conflict between the 2 families did not suddenly erupt on the day of the killing, but had been simmering for a long time. Ko's side carried deep resentment, believing the upstairs family was deliberately making noise, while Tra's family repeatedly tried to seek mediation without success, causing tensions to escalate further and further. On October 6, 2025, Singapore police escorted Ko Ah-Hui back to the scene for an investigative reconstruction. Ko appeared in a red detention uniform, in handcuffs and leg restraints, and was supported by 2 plainclothes officers as he was led to his unit on the 5th floor. After nearly an hour, the investigators brought him up to the 6th floor where the tragedy occurred. The reconstruction was conducted discreetly, with media only allowed to observe from a distance of about 4 meters. Throughout the process, the suspect cooperated calmly, reenacting the full sequence as requested: his movements, how he held the knife, and the positions where he attacked. His nods in response to police questions indicated that he had admitted to what he did. At around 11:25 a.m., the reconstruction ended, and Ko was taken away under tight supervision. The reconstruction helped investigators compare and verify witness statements against the suspect's own account, allowing them to complete an overall picture of the case. After more than 2 weeks of urgent investigation, Singapore police officially announced they had gathered sufficient evidence to confirm that Ko Ah-Hui was the person who fatally stabbed Nguyen Phuong Tra and seriously injured her husband. The case file was forwarded directly to the Singapore prosecution for charges of murder. Throughout this process, Singapore authorities also paid special attention to supporting the victim's family. MP Jackson Lam personally met Tra's relatives to express his deepest condolences and pledge support for the victim's 2 young children. Authorities also arranged for the children to be assessed and treated by child psychologists, helping them, at least in part, cope with the devastating shock of losing their mother. What is most shocking is that before the tragedy in Yishun, none of the residents could have imagined that the elderly neighbor who had lived nearby for years was capable of committing such a horrific killing. Ko Ah Hui, 66 years old, was a Singaporean of Chinese descent. He was born into an ordinary working-class family, had limited formal education, and mainly used Chinese in daily life. For most of his life, Ko Ah Hui worked as a technical worker at an electronics factory, until he retired at the age of 62. He and his wife had 1 adult son who now lives separately elsewhere. Neighbors described Ko as quiet, temperamental, and somewhat eccentric. He rarely interacted with people around him and seldom took part in community activities. By contrast, Madame Ko, his wife, was the one who regularly went out, did the grocery shopping, and participated in neighborhood events. According to her, Ko was often irritable and suffered from insomnia because he was extremely sensitive to sound. Even a small noise could make him jolt, his heart racing, and he might be unable to fall asleep again. This extreme sensitivity gradually pushed him into a state of obsession, frustration, and poor self-control, so much so that his wife sought advice from the neighborhood committee because she herself was overwhelmed by the situation. On some nights, he would even use a floor mop or broom to pound loudly on the ceiling in retaliation for the noise from Tra and her husband's unit upstairs. But Ko's retaliatory behavior only worsened relations between the 2 families to the point where they could barely face each other. Madame Ko repeatedly urged her husband to stay calm and even suggested moving to a quieter place, but he brushed it all aside. And after months of being tormented by noise, on the morning of September 24th, 2025, Ko Ah Hui's anger finally erupted, leading to tragedy. According to the reconstructed sequence, at around 7:15 a.m., Tra and her husband were preparing to take their 2 children to school when Ko suddenly appeared holding a kitchen knife. Before Mr. Lim could even react, Ko lunged and swung the knife. Lim dodged the first strike, but Tra was stabbed in the chest as she tried to shield her husband. In the panic, as Lim tried to catch his wife and cried for help, Ko turned back and stabbed him several more times in the back, causing him to collapse on the spot. The screams for help echoed through the corridor, sending nearby residents rushing out in alarm. 2 men who were close by immediately ran in and worked together to restrain the attacker, stopping him from striking again. At the same time, other witnesses quickly called the police and carried the couple's 2 children into a nearby unit to keep them safe. Just minutes later, police officers and ambulances arrived at the scene and rushed the victims to the hospital. After the incident, neighbors said Ko Ah Hui had also argued with them before over trivial matters, such as food smells drifting into adjacent units or disputes over parking spaces. Some acquaintances of the family also revealed that Ko's mental health was unstable and that he had previously been prescribed sedatives for chronic insomnia, and his condition reportedly worsened as his obsession with noise intensified. For that reason, investigators believed Ko's actions were likely an outburst of extreme rage, or the result of an acute mental disturbance. Because of concerns about his psychological state, shortly after his arrest, the court ordered Ko Ah Hui to undergo a psychiatric assessment at the Changi Prison Medical Center to evaluate his ability to understand his actions and control his behavior. Singapore authorities classified this case as especially serious, so jurisdiction was transferred directly to the Supreme Court of Singapore. Because Ko Ah Hui was still being treated in hospital under tight police guard, the initial charging hearing was held right at his bedside, with a roving judge in attendance. At this special hearing, Ko was formally charged with murdering Nguyen Phuong Tra. His act of stabbing and seriously injuring the victim's husband was also recorded in the case file, but it was treated as part of the circumstances of the murder charge. As the charge was read out, Ko lay motionless on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, offering no response at all. He may still have been under the effects of pain medication or in shock after the incident. The judge stated that the accused would remain in remand custody for further investigation and pending formal trial. Under Singapore's justice system, the offense of murder carries a maximum sentence of the death penalty, or life imprisonment, if the court recognizes special mitigating circumstances. On October 9th, 2025, Ko Ah-hui appeared before the Singapore state courts via a live video link from Changi prison. He wore a red t-shirt, looked more alert than before, and nodded as a Hokkien interpreter relayed the judge's words. At the hearing, the prosecutor asked the court to allow the accused to remain detained at the Changi Prison Medical Center for psychiatric evaluation. The reason was that the case would be sent to the Supreme Court, so it was necessary to determine Ko's mental state at the time of the offense in order to assess his criminal responsibility. The judge granted the request and ordered that Ko remain in custody at the prison medical facility, with specialist doctors assigned to examine and assess him. The next hearing was set for October 30th, 2025, to review the evaluation results and the next procedural steps. Legal observers in Singapore noted that the evidence in this case appeared quite straightforward, so the focus at trial would likely shift to motive and the accused's psychological condition. If the psychiatric assessment finds that Ko was suffering from a mental disorder or was unable to control his actions at the time of the offense, the defense may seek to reduce the charge to culpable homicide due to loss of self-control. In that scenario, the maximum sentence would be life imprisonment rather than the death penalty associated with a standard murder conviction. Even so, public opinion in Singapore remained deeply outraged at the perpetrator's cruelty toward an innocent woman. Many people argued that no matter how angry or frustrated someone may be, taking a neighbor's life is an act that can never be justified. For that reason, the Singapore prosecution will pursue the case to the fullest extent to ensure the perpetrator receives a severe sentence proportionate to the exceptionally serious nature of this crime. The Yishun killing was not only a tragedy for the victim's family, but also a stark warning about simmering conflicts in urban life where people live close together yet lack understanding and empathy. Throughout the final days of September and the beginning of October 2025, Singapore's media was flooded with reports on the case, with shocking headlines such as "Noise dispute turns deadly" and "Young mother killed by enraged neighbor." On social media, debates erupted intensely. Most voices condemned Ko's actions as cruel and inhumane. However, some also raised questions about the community's responsibility and the effectiveness of the current mediation system, arguing that if mediation had been handled more effectively, perhaps the tragedy could have been prevented. At the same time, the case exposed several shortcomings in how civil disputes are managed in Singapore. At present, the authorities mainly encourage voluntary mediation. But according to statistics, fewer than 1/3 of mediation cases reach a resolution because one party often refuses to cooperate. After the Yishun case, many legal experts called for stronger measures, such as mandatory mediation for long-running disputes, or administrative penalties for those who deliberately harass their neighbors in order to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Hello everyone. In mid-July 2021, the Vietnamese community in Singapore was shaken by a brutal double stabbing in the usually peaceful Ang Mo Kio neighborhood. After a burst of arguing and scuffling, what people saw were two blood-soaked bodies with fatal wounds collapsed right outside an apartment corridor. One of the victims was a middle-aged Vietnamese woman, and the other was her common-law husband. Notably, there were no signs of forced entry or robbery at the scene. So what exactly happened? Who was behind this tragedy? Stay with Vietnamese Case Files until the very end to unravel the many unanswered questions in this unsettling case. A quick note, all content in today's video has been researched and compiled by our team from multiple sources. If there are any inaccuracies or details that need correction, please leave a comment below so we can update and fix them. Before we get into the details, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications right now so you won't miss other gripping cases on Vietnamese Case Files. Thank you for your support. Late at night, on the 15th of July 2021, at 12:55 a.m., Singapore police received an emergency call from the Ang Mo Kio residential area. The caller introduced himself as Tan Cheng Mun, a tenant in one of the apartment blocks. He said he had returned from drinking with a neighbor, and after taking the elevator up to the 5th floor, they encountered a woman in the corridor. The woman and the neighbor who was with Tan immediately got into a loud argument before a physical altercation broke out. Terrified, Tan hurriedly took a few photos of the scene with his phone and ran. Less than 10 minutes later, police sirens tore through the quiet night. As the Singapore police rapid response officers moved into the building, Tan, who had been hiding downstairs, came out to cooperate and provide more information. According to him, officers rushed to an apartment unit on the 5th floor and were confronted with a haunting sight. A middle-aged man lay barely alive in a pool of blood, suffering multiple traumatic injuries, with deep gashes to his neck, chest, and back that had soaked his shirt. Nearby, a woman was also unconscious, covered in multiple wounds, lying next to a blood-stained knife. Both were only faintly breathing. Officers immediately called an ambulance and performed basic first aid on the spot. At around 1:08 a.m., the ambulance arrived. Paramedics quickly bandaged and tried to stop the bleeding, then transported both victims to Tan Tock Seng Hospital. The fifth-floor corridor area was sealed off for forensic processing and investigation. Under dim yellow corridor lights, investigators saw a scene straight out of a horror film. A trail of blood stretched across the cement floor outside the unit's door, spreading toward the elevator area. The weapon was a sharp knife lying at the scene. A quick look suggested it was a household kitchen knife with a wooden handle and a blade about 20 centimeters long, the kind commonly used at home. In addition, police found several empty beer cans and discarded bottles strewn near the unit's entrance. On the corridor's tiled floor, signs of a struggle were also evident in scattered items: a pair of sandals tossed aside, a mobile phone with a shattered screen, and several strands of a woman's hair smeared with blood. Investigators also noted that the main door lock showed no signs of tampering, indicating there was no intruder from outside. When the forensic team arrived, they photographed the scene, marked each bloodstain, and seized the knife for fingerprinting and DNA testing. Notably, despite intensive emergency treatment, the male victim did not survive. He took his last breath at approximately 7:17 a.m. that same day at the hospital due to the severity of his injuries. The female victim was fortunate to survive after surgery, but she also sustained serious injuries. So what happened between these two people? Who attacked whom, and who was truly the victim? To clarify these doubts, police needed to confirm the identities of the two people at the scene and the nature of their relationship. Early assessments suggested there was no third party, and that the incident stemmed from a conflict between the two, making relationship verification even more crucial to establishing motive. Through residency registration records and statements from neighbors around the unit, police were able to identify the male victim without much difficulty. He was Hoang Khang, 51 years old, a Chinese Singaporean who had lived in the Ang Mo Kio area for decades. He worked assembling jewelry for a jewelry company and had a stable income. To improve his finances, Cho purchased a 3-room flat at Block 562, Ang Mo Kio Avenue 3, and rented out the spare rooms. According to a longtime neighbor, about 10 years earlier, Cho moved there with his first wife, a Hong Kong citizen. They had a daughter together, but the marriage fell apart after a few years. Cho later remarried a younger Vietnamese woman and had another daughter, now about 4 years old. However, the second marriage also did not last. The Vietnamese wife and their young daughter moved out around the year 2018. After 2 failed marriages, he still maintained good relationships with his children. In particular, he was said to deeply love his young daughter with his Vietnamese wife. Cho was described as gentle and polite, but fond of socializing, drinking, and making friends. He often went out with friends for beer to drown his sorrows after work. In July 2020, he allowed a single woman to live in his home. This sparked some gossip, but he soon explained that with COVID-19 causing hardships, he was helping someone find a place to stay. Later, when neighbors learned the two had become a couple, many were happy for the man, twice widowed, as some put it, for finding happiness again. That woman was Nguyen Ngoc Giau, the other victim at the scene. She was 43 years old, a Vietnamese woman with a complicated background and a life marked by upheaval. Giau was born and raised in southern Vietnam. Her childhood was not peaceful, her parents divorced early, she was raised by her maternal grandmother, and the family struggled financially. In 2010, at the age of 28, Nguyen Ngoc Giau left her hometown for Singapore, hoping to change her life. At first, she worked as a hostess at a karaoke lounge in the Geylang area to make a living. The job was unstable and full of temptations, but it also led her to a relationship with a Singaporean man. After only 2 months of dating, Giau married him and obtained permanent resident status in Singapore. They had 2 children together, but family life was unhappy due to language and cultural differences as well as financial pressure. Giau reportedly fell into depression, and at one point attempted to take her own life, after which she was admitted to the Institute of Mental Health for treatment. Although she survived, she carried deep psychological scars and began turning to alcohol to cope. Around the years 2018 to 2019, Giau lived separately from her husband. She left their 2 children in his care, then moved out to build an independent life and earn money to send back for the kids. With the hairstyling skills she had learned in Vietnam, Giau opened a small perm salon serving the Vietnamese community in Singapore, while also selling goods online on the side. Even so, loneliness in a foreign land always weighed on her. The last time Giau saw her children was in 2019. After that, COVID-19 restrictions meant she could not visit them. During this empty, isolating period, Giau met Hoang Khiang. At first, Ngoc Giau was simply Cho's tenant, but it was Cho's 4-year-old daughter who played matchmaker for the 2 of them. The innocent little girl took Auntie Giau's hand, placed it into her father's hand, and told them to stay together, making both adults laugh and feel a small spark. By October 2020, the 2 officially became a couple and moved into the same room, living together like husband and wife. At home, Cho supported Giau financially, while she handled the cooking and household chores. He once praised Giau for cooking well and being thoughtful, things his previous wives sometimes struggled with due to language differences. A relationship that seemed meant to help 2 wounded people heal. How did it end with 1 dead, 1 grievously injured, and the survivor suspected as the attacker? Immediately after the incident, the Singapore police force launched a major investigation with the Criminal Investigation Department, CID, involved. The bloodstained knife found at the scene was sealed and sent to the Health Sciences Authority, HSA, for DNA comparison. The results later showed the blood on the knife belonged to Cho and partly to Giau, consistent with both of their injuries. This strengthened the theory that no third party was involved. The most important witness was Tan Cheng Mun. That same night, Tan was brought to headquarters for a detailed statement. He recounted the argument. Giau, in a jealous rage, confronted Cho. Cho, irritated, told Tan to call the police. Then Giau ran into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and attacked Cho. Tan also handed over photos taken on his phone, clearly capturing Giau swinging the knife at Cho outside the unit. Alongside Tan's account, police also collected statements from nearby neighbors. A 73-year-old man living next door said that around 12:30 to 1 a.m., he heard loud arguing, but assumed it was the neighbor's usual couple's quarrel and did not intervene. In the morning, when he opened his door, he saw blood across the corridor and police all over outside Cho's home. So what about motive? From the scene and witness accounts, the immediate trigger appeared to be a sudden relationship conflict after both had been drinking heavily. But investigators did not stop there. They dug deeper into the history between the victim and the suspect. From here, the next part of that seemingly fairy tale love story began to come to light. It turned out that behind the image of a gentle, devoted partner, Nguyen Ngoc Giau also struggled with severe alcohol dependence, an after effect of her earlier mental health issues. She reportedly needed to drink a few cans almost every day just to fall asleep. Whenever she drank heavily, Ngoc Giau's personality would change completely. She became jealous and paranoid, suspected Cho of having an affair, searched his phone, dragged up old photos to hurl insults. More than once, Giau allegedly became physically violent toward Cho when she was drunk. On the other hand, Cho was not entirely blameless either. He had been involved with a few other women, including one who worked as a beer promoter. That detail hit a raw nerve tied to Ngoc Giau's shameful past, and it made her extremely tense. Moreover, Giau still had a legal husband and was not yet formally separated, which also weighed on Cho. Over time, exhausted by the violence and jealousy of his common-law partner, Cho began thinking about kicking Giau out and ending the toxic relationship. But every time Cho hinted at it, Giau demanded compensation for her youth, from 5,000 to 10,000 Singapore dollars, before she would move out. That infuriated him and made him feel used, causing the conflict to grow worse. In fact, based on local police records, investigators learned the couple had gotten into a physical altercation a few months earlier on the ground floor and were detained for public disorder. That matter had not even been resolved when this tragedy happened. It showed their relationship had already escalated into violence long before. It was not a sudden, one-off outburst. As for motive, it could be understood that Nguyen Ngoc Giau was furious because she was about to lose her financial support. According to a mutual friend, Cho had planned to end things for good on the night of the incident. In parallel, police seized electronic devices for the investigation. Nguyen Ngoc Giau's phone was collected right at the scene. When investigators examined it, they were surprised to find a series of video clips and audio recordings that Giau herself had made in the days leading up to the case. One video, filmed on the night of July 14th, showed Cho and Tan near the elevator, while Giau cursed at Cho, accusing him of going out drinking, "Who were you with?" The video cut off when the scuffle began. The phone also contained 6 separate audio recordings, including the sounds of shouting, Giau, crying, and objects crashing. Ngoc Giau appeared to have secretly recorded their arguments, possibly to keep evidence for someone. Either way, this digital trail gave police a clearer picture of a relationship steeped in violence and tension. A familiar pattern emerged. Drink, then argue. Argue, then fight. Alcohol made them lose control, and the violence intensified over time. The night of the incident was no different. Both had been drinking. An examination found their blood alcohol levels were quite high. A psychiatric assessment report from the Institute of Mental Health, IMH, dated August 16, 2021, concluded that Giau had long-term alcohol dependence and, at the time of the offense, was in a state of acute alcohol intoxication. Even so, the doctor concluded Giau still had the capacity to understand and distinguish right from wrong at that time, meaning it was not a case of insanity or psychosis. This was legally significant because it ruled out a defense that the suspect had completely lost control of her actions. In the days after the case, police continued a meticulous search of Cho's apartment. In the kitchen, they found a knife sharpening stone beside the dish rack, still bearing fresh metal filings. Tests later confirmed the filings came from the weapon used in the attack. This suggested that on the evening of July 14th, in a fit of anger, Giau likely sharpened the knife to prepare to settle matters with Cho. It was an aggravating indicator of intent, distinguishing a planned attack from a spontaneous outburst. With the investigation centered on Nguyen and Ngoc Giau, police also examined her legal status. They confirmed Giau was Vietnamese, came to Singapore in 2010 through marriage migration, and currently held permanent resident status. This raised the question of whether her legal husband was involved in or aware of her relationship with Cho. However, the investigation found he was not involved. They had been separated for a long time, and he was not in Singapore at the time of the incident. After nearly a month of gathering evidence and strengthening the case file, on July 16, 2021, when Nguyen Ngoc Giau's condition had stabilized somewhat in the hospital, police initiated formal charges. At her hospital bed, a mobile magistrate was brought in to read the charge. Nguyen Ngoc Giau was charged with murder under Section 300 of Singapore's Penal Code, an offense punishable by death. As the charge was read, Giau lay silently in bed, her face showing no emotion, perhaps because she was still under pain medication and in psychological shock. She was then remanded in custody under police guard in the ward. A few weeks later, after recovering, Giau was transferred to the Changi prison complex to await trial. During that time, investigators continued to complete the case file by reconstructing a detailed timeline from all available evidence. Based on the apartment block's CCTV footage, information provided by witnesses, and the suspect Nguyen Ngoc Giau's own statements, the team finalized a full reconstruction of what happened, as follows. On the night of July 14th into the early morning of July 15th, 2021, inside the 5th floor unit at Block 562, Ang Mo Kio Avenue 3, the suffocating backdrop of a tragedy slowly took shape. Nguyen Ngoc Giau sat slumped on the floor in a darkened living room, surrounded by scattered beer cans, signs of hours spent steeped in alcohol. The clock struck 11:30 p.m. Her head was spinning, but her jealousy burned. Since the afternoon, Giau had called Cho dozens of times, only to hear the lifeless ringtone again and again. Her anger peaked when she remembered the earlier argument about a young woman who worked as a beer promoter, the very person who had called and invited Cho out drinking. Drunk and overwhelmed by resentment, Giau began thinking about scaring Cho to teach him a lesson. Staggering into the kitchen, she opened a drawer and took out the Thai-style knife she used for chopping meat, then ran the blade across a sharpening stone to make it keener. She even nicked the tip of her finger to test how sharp it was. Around then, outside the unit, Tan called to say he was bringing Cho home. At 12:50 a.m., the elevator stopped on the 5th floor. Cho and Tan stepped out and saw Giau standing by the door, one hand on the wall, her gaze fixed as if she had been waiting. She rushed forward, demanding to know where he had been and with whom. Knowing she had secretly checked his phone before, Cho lost his temper and shoved her aside to enter the room. That push sent Giau into a rage. She began attacking her common-law husband. Tan tried to stop her but was powerless. The shouting echoed down the empty hallway at midnight. When Cho told Tan, "Call the police," Giau became even more aggressive and ran into the kitchen. Moments later, she burst back out with the gleaming knife. The flash of steel under the corridor lights chilled Tan to the bone. In a fit of irrational jealousy, she screamed and lunged at Cho. Though he tried to defend himself, the blade sank into his shoulder and blood burst out, soaking his shirt. Panicked, Cho stumbled backward toward the elevator, but Giau did not stop. Tan stood frozen then. Forcing himself to move, he pulled out his phone and snapped photos as evidence. Seeing the camera flash, Giau turned on him. Terrified, Tan threw down his slippers and bolted down the stairs, fleeing the scene. Now only the attacker and the victim remained in the corridor. Cho lay barely breathing, blood pooling beneath him. Giau's fury began to ebb, replaced by fear. She went up to shake him, but heard only harsh, rasping breaths. Seeing her hands stained red, Giau snapped back to reality and wailed in despair. Thoughts of prison and of her 2 young children flashed through her mind, sending her into panic. Drunk and terrified, she decided to take her own life. The searing pain made her dizzy, the knife slipped from her hand, and she collapsed beside Cho, their blood mingling on the cold tiled floor. That fateful night finally closed, with blood, tears, and the blare of ambulance sirens echoing through the estate. After more than 3 years of waiting for trial, the court proceedings finally began, opening the final chapter of a blood-soaked tragedy that started with a few cans of beer and a surge of jealousy on that fateful night of July 15th. The murder trial of Nguyen and Ngoc Giau began on April 8, 2025. The presiding judge was Justice Dedar Singh Gill, a senior judge known for being strict but fair. On the first day, Nguyen Ngoc Giau appeared in court, looking gaunt, her expression seemingly blank. But when the prosecution played a short video showing Cho lying collapsed in a pool of blood, she suddenly broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The hearing had to pause for a few minutes so the accused could compose herself. Led by Deputy Public Prosecutor Benedict Taeyong, the prosecution argued that this was a deliberate and serious killing. They emphasized that the accused acted out of hatred and jealousy and that she was fully lucid at the time, meaning she knew exactly what she was doing. To persuade the court, the prosecution also presented an agreed summary of facts between both sides and said they intended to call about 65 witnesses to present evidence, most of whom would provide written testimony. Physical exhibits were also tendered. Crucially, the prosecution also had 9 statements given by the accused herself to the police during the investigation. During cross-examination, the defense counsel, Mr. Fabian Khang, focused sharply on the victim's complicated background. He questioned Tan about whether Cho had a wife and children and whether there were family conflicts. In reality, the defense used this to subtly paint a picture of a victim who was not entirely blameless, suggesting that Cho also bore some responsibility in a toxic relationship. Over the following days, the court heard technical evidence, including forensic reports and the accused's psychiatric assessment. The prosecution also showed videos and images extracted from phones and cameras, material that again reduced Giau to tears in open court. When the defense case began, Nguyen and Ngoc Giau took the witness stand for the first time on April 17, 2025, to tell her side of the story. Through a Vietnamese interpreter, she tearfully admitted their relationship had been stormy. Her lawyer, Khang, then guided her through 3 major arguments that happened before the incident. Giau said the first fight erupted because both suspected the other of cheating, and Cho lashed out, leaving her face bruised. The second time, Giau wanted to break up. Cho demanded she return gifts, and Tan allegedly restrained her so Cho could remove a ring and necklace from her. The third time, when she asked for money for a ticket back to Vietnam, Cho cursed that he hoped the plane would crash into the sea. Enraged, Giau assaulted him. They then fought each other, and the incident ended with both being arrested by the police. From there, her lawyer emphasized that Giau had wanted to leave, but Cho kept pulling her back by demanding gifts back or even threatening and intimidating her, trapping the relationship in a dead-end cycle. When talking about the day of the incident, Giau said it did not happen in an instant, but that it had started 2 to 3 days earlier involving Cho's new girlfriend. The accused also insisted she never intended to kill Cho and that everything happened in an uncontrollable state due to alcohol. These claims partly supported the defense's argument that, because she was intoxicated and had lost control, the act was not premeditated. However, the prosecution immediately pushed back by presenting evidence of the knife sharpening. They argued that sharpening the knife showed the accused had been planning revenge against Cho early on, rather than acting unconsciously. The prosecution stressed that although Giau was drunk, she still knew how to wield a knife and strike at vital areas, showing a clear intent to harm the victim. Meanwhile, the defense asked the court to take into account the accused's intoxication and extreme agitation after being insulted and abused by the victim, arguing that her actions may have been meant to injure rather than to kill. The trial stretched on for many days as a large volume of evidence was presented. After oral arguments concluded, the court announced an adjournment to deliberate. As of now, the final verdict has not yet been delivered. If convicted of murder, Nguyen Giau could face the death penalty or life imprisonment. On the other hand, if the court reduces the charge to culpable homicide, such as due to provocation or a temporary loss of self-control, the sentence would be lighter, possibly only several decades in prison. But whichever way it goes, Nguyen Giau's fate now rests entirely on Singapore's strict legal scales. What do you think, based on the points raised by both sides? What sentence will Nguyen Giau receive? Share your thoughts in the comments. In the early hours of May 24th, 2011, in Wolgok Village, Cheongdo County, Gyeongsangbuk-do Province, a resident was jolted awake by a loud bang and frantic screams outside. A man was pounding on the door, begging someone to help him call the police. His behavior terrified the person inside, who immediately sensed something was terribly wrong. When the resident opened the door, they were horrified to realize it was their neighbor, nearly naked, wearing only underwear, and shouting strange phrases over and over. A call was placed straight to the police station in the middle of the night. Just minutes later, officers from the Cheongdo police arrived. They quickly approached and tried to calm the man down. Only then did he seem to come back to his senses and point toward a nearby rental house. Under the harsh sweep of flashlights, the first officer stepped into the room, its door still wide open, with an overwhelming sense of dread. What they saw made even seasoned investigators shudder. Across a floor smeared with blood, a young Asian woman lay motionless, her body covered in wounds, her clothes soaked crimson. Blood had pooled broadly across the floor. Even more shocking, right beside her was a newborn boy, only a few weeks old, crying desperately, his tiny body also spattered with his mother's blood. The officers hurriedly carried the baby outside and asked a kind neighbor nearby to comfort him for the time being. When they checked the woman, the investigators could only shake their heads. She was already dead. Her young face was frozen, etched with unbearable pain and terror. A wooden-handled kitchen knife lay nearby, its sharp blade coated in blood, clear proof of the violence that had just occurred. The number of wounds was so extreme that police could not immediately give an exact count, only estimating that the attacker had stabbed her dozens of times in rapid succession. Under the flash of crime scene cameras, investigators documented the first crucial details. The victim's body lay on the floor, and there were no clear signs of a prolonged struggle or extended fighting, suggesting the attack happened suddenly and very quickly. The newborn was not injured, indicating the attacker's target was the mother alone. Based on these initial facts, police believed this was a homicide rooted in a family conflict. But to determine the motive and uncover every hidden truth in this case, they needed to begin an exceptionally meticulous investigation immediately. While searching the room, police found several identification documents in the name of Hoang Nam, born in 1987. Through the residency management system, they confirmed that Nam had registered her marriage to a South Korean citizen and had entered the country less than a year earlier. However, to be certain and to establish grounds for the necessary diplomatic procedures, police still contacted the Vietnamese embassy in South Korea to request coordination. The Vietnamese side quickly sent an official to the scene to help verify the victim's identity. Very soon, the first pieces of the victim's background came together. She was Hoang Nam, born on October 10, 1987, the youngest child in a poor farming family in Binh Thuan province. Nam was considered the most educated in the family, but she still only finished high school before moving to Ho Chi Minh City to work as a seamstress, hoping to change her life and support her elderly mother. But the path ahead felt too uncertain. In the end, Nam chose the route many rural Vietnamese women at the time also chose, marrying a foreign man through a broker in hopes of a peaceful family life and better economic opportunities. In April 2010, at the age of 22, Hoang Thi Nam married a South Korean man 14 years older than her. The wedding was held simply in Vietnam. After the ceremony, the groom returned to South Korea first, while Nam had to wait for her visa paperwork. Because South Korea had tightened screening of international marriage applications, she waited 4 months until August 3rd, 2010, before she finally arrived in South Korea to reunite with her husband. Neighbors and local authorities also confirmed that Nam and her husband had moved into a one-bedroom rental in Ngoc village a few months earlier. The wife spoke limited Korean and rarely interacted with outsiders, but she was attending a Korean language class at the county's multicultural center. The victim's husband was named Lim Chae-won, born in 1974, originally from Gyeongsang-buk-do province. Lim came from a working-class family. His parents were farmers, living in a rural area with strict traditional values. Lim was the eldest son, with one younger brother. He finished high school and, after completing mandatory military service, worked various manual labor jobs. At the time, he had a steady job at a small metalworking shop in the province, earning an average income. Friends described Lim as quiet and gentle. He was not involved in any vices, had never been known for violence or picking fights, and had no criminal record. He was even somewhat timid in social situations. His decision to marry a foreign wife seemed partly driven by pressure to settle down before turning 40 and by how difficult it was for him to find a suitable match in South Korea. Through a matchmaking company in Daegu, Lim met Hoang Thi Nam. He took the relationship seriously and genuinely hoped to build a happy home with his Vietnamese wife. He had even shown Nam's photos to friends, proudly saying his wife was very young and beautiful. That suggested their feelings, though the match began through an agency, were real. So what exactly happened on that fateful night? As soon as police arrived at the rented room, Lim Chae-won was automatically treated as the #1 suspect because he was the only person at the scene, and at that moment, he appeared highly suspicious. He was immediately taken to investigators for questioning. Meanwhile, evidence collection at the scene moved quickly. The kitchen knife found beside the body was sealed as evidence and sent for fingerprint and blood analysis. The results were as expected. Fingerprints on the handle matched suspect Lim Chae-won, and the blood on the blade belonged to the victim. The autopsy later confirmed that Hoang Thi Nam died from massive blood loss and internal organ damage caused by 53 consecutive stab wounds concentrated in the chest, abdomen, and neck. Several wounds were so deep they reached the heart and lungs, meaning the victim likely died almost immediately. The fact that the injuries were spread across her body suggested the attacker struck wildly in a state of extreme agitation, with no sign of stopping until she collapsed completely. This aligned more with a sudden explosive rage than with a premeditated plan. However, investigators also found several faint bruises on the victim's neck and arms that appeared older. This raised a troubling question. Had she been abused before the murder? A follow-up inquiry into possible domestic violence was opened. At first, local police records showed no formal complaints from the victim during her time in South Korea. But several Vietnamese acquaintances of Nam soon spoke up, saying she had hinted that her husband had used physical force during arguments. By those accounts, life as a bride in South Korea had not been easy for Hoang Thi Nam. Nam was very tidy, but she was not yet used to her in-laws' household routines, and her mother-in-law often scolded her about cleanliness and bathing. The repeated remarks that she needed to wash more thoroughly left Nam feeling ashamed and hurt. On top of that, Nam worried about her family back home. She frequently urged her husband to send more money to Vietnam to help her mother. But with a factory worker's salary of about 1.5 million won a month, Lim could only give her 100,000 won each month to send home. That amount, equivalent to roughly 2 million Vietnamese dong, felt far too small. Nam was disappointed and believed her husband didn't care about her family. The language barrier was also a major obstacle. Nam barely spoke Korean, while her husband didn't understand Vietnamese. Their communication was extremely limited, often relying only on gestures and looks. Small misunderstandings could easily build up into bigger conflicts. In her husband's family, the person Nam was closest to was her brother-in-law, but even that couldn't fill the loneliness of living far from home. Nam once confided that she wanted to live separately, not with her parents-in-law, to reduce tension. However, Lim was the eldest son and always wanted his wife to get along with his parents and fulfill the duties expected of a daughter-in-law. Her wish to move out left Lim caught between love and filial duty, and he chose to persuade her to keep enduring the situation. The tension between them only continued to simmer. The breaking point came in early October 2010, just 2 months after arriving in South Korea, when Nam left her in-laws' home and sought help at a support center for immigrant women in Gyeongsangbuk-do. She stayed there from October 5th to November 22nd, 2010. Staff later recalled that when she arrived, Nam was deeply desperate and intended to divorce. The center provided counseling and looked into the situation. Notably, at the time, Nam did not accuse her husband of physically assaulting her. She only said there was family conflict, and local police helped place her at the center as a temporary refuge. After some time, Hoang Nam discovered she was pregnant with her first child with Lim Chae-won, and the relationship between the two shifted again. Hearing that his wife was pregnant, Lim immediately softened. He promised they would move out and live separately as a couple, so long as she returned home. For the sake of the baby, Nam agreed to come back, carrying hope for a new beginning. True to Lim's promise, the young couple later moved out and rented a small room in Wolgok village, Cheongdo. In the first months of 2011, Nam's life seemed somewhat easier. She proactively enrolled in Korean classes at the Cheongdo Multicultural Center, diligently attending twice a week even while pregnant. Staff at the center still remembered the image of the Vietnamese bride who kept studying even with a baby bump, and even joined the county's bullfighting festival field trip. To outsiders, Nam appeared to be trying hard to integrate and build happiness in her second homeland. On May 5th, 2011, the joy seemed doubled when Hoang Nam gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The tiny child seemed as though he would help bond the couple after so many storms. But reality was not so simple. The embers of conflict were still burning underneath. Seeing his wife pregnant, Lim Chae-won became more gentle and accommodating. But deep down, he still carried many unresolved feelings and often felt resentful that he had to follow along with a foreign wife and leave his family home. He was not a heavy drinker by nature, but sadness led him to alcohol more often. Some nights he came home tipsy and vented his pent-up frustrations, and the couple would clash again. Upon learning this, police immediately questioned the suspect and his relatives in detail about any previous physical altercations between the couple. Although investigators could not confirm every detail of the past, they recorded that physical contact between the spouses had occurred, and it was highly likely there had been some occasions when Lim used minor force, but the victim did not report it to police. This detail signaled to investigators that the marriage was not as happy and peaceful as many had assumed. The most critical lead at this point was Lim Chae-won's statement. At the station, Lim appeared remorseful and devastated. After regaining some composure, he said the couple had argued frequently since their marriage. On the evening of May 23, 2011, they argued again. The dispute centered on family and money. Hoang Nam wanted her husband to send more money back to Vietnam for her mother, while Lim was bitter because his wife repeatedly brought up divorce whenever she got angry. That night, Nam mentioned divorce, yet again, even threatening to take the baby and leave in the middle of the night. Lim's account matched a key detail from neighbors, who reported hearing the argument at around 1 o'clock in the morning. In a fit of rage, Lim admitted he became physically violent with his wife. It started with a slap, but Nam fought back fiercely and held the baby as she tried to run for the door. Seeing that, Lim grabbed her arm and yanked hard. He stated that, "My mind went blank. There was only anger left." When he noticed a kitchen knife on a nearby shelf, Lim said he stopped thinking, grabbed it, and stabbed his wife repeatedly. Only when he heard the baby scream did he snap back, then he looked again and realized his wife was already motionless in a pool of blood. He was utterly terrified by what he had done. Panicking, Lim quickly picked up the baby and put him on the bed. Then, nearly out of his mind, ran out of the house, went to the nearest neighbor's home, pounded on the door for help, and confessed. Lim's statement was compared against physical evidence and witness testimony, and it fully aligned. The neighbor confirmed that at around 1:15 a.m., he saw Lim pounding on the door, shouting a confession, with his body covered in blood. At that time, Lim was wearing only underwear, his face utterly dazed, showing that after the attack inside the room, he ran out to seek help immediately, with no preparation or plan to flee. A blood alcohol test showed that Lim had been drinking that evening, but not to the point of intoxication. He still had sufficient capacity to understand his actions. However, the forensic doctor also assessed that at the time of the offense, the suspect may have fallen into a state of sudden psychological agitation, a type of temporary loss of control caused by accumulated frustration. But another psychological angle could not be ruled out. Did Lim harbor paranoid thoughts that he was being deceived? Because not only Lim, there have been cases where Korean men who marry through matchmaking agencies, when conflicts arise, come to suspect that their foreign wives are using them for money and then trying to leave the country. In Nam's case, police hypothesized that her repeated demands for divorce may have made Lim suspicious that he had been tricked into a sham marriage to be exploited for money. Although Lim did not explicitly admit this, his statements about finances and his wife's wish to return to Vietnam suggested that fear of abandonment and being used was always lurking in his mind. After about a week of intensive investigation, police completed the case file. All evidence indicated the crime was committed by Lim Chae-won alone, with no signs of third-party involvement. On May 25, 2011, police informed the Vietnamese embassy of their initial investigative conclusion and released Nam's body after the autopsy so her family could handle the funeral arrangements. The investigation phase ended, giving way to criminal proceedings. The case of Lim Chae-won killing his Vietnamese wife was swiftly indicted. Public opinion in both South Korea and Vietnam followed the story closely, and media in both countries continuously covered the trial and called for strict justice for the victim. The first instance trial took place in late October 2011 at the Daegu District Court, held as a circuit hearing due to the case's exceptional public attention. Prosecutors charged Lim Chae-won with homicide and emphasized aggravating factors such as attacking a wife who had recently given birth and the brutality of the act. They also stressed that the defendant stabbed the victim 53 times, showing a determined intent to take her life to the very end, and requested a sentence of 15 years in prison. Before the court, Lim Chae-won kept his head down, looking gaunt and exhausted. He admitted everything and did not deny the crime. Accordingly, the defense strategy, by a court-appointed attorney, focused mainly on the circumstances of the offense, arguing that the defendant committed the act while in a state of extreme emotional agitation. The attorney argued that Lim had been under heavy pressure from family expectations and cultural differences, compounded by mild alcohol use that led to a momentary loss of self-control. They also raised mitigating factors. The defendant had a previously clean record with no prior convictions. He turned himself in and cooperated with investigators. And notably, the victim's family had submitted a letter requesting leniency. This was a particularly striking detail in the proceedings. Hoang Thinam's mother sent a letter to the court expressing her wish that South Korea show mercy to her son-in-law because her grandchild carried the Lim family bloodline. She did not want her grandchild to grow up without a father, and the family's only wish was to learn the truth, not to seek revenge. The letter, translated into Korean, moved many people in the courtroom, including the presiding judge. Hearing those words, Lim Chae-won broke down in tears and apologized. For the first time, he dared to lift his head and address the Vietnamese embassy representative attending the hearing, expressing remorse to his wife's family back in Vietnam. Lim tearfully said he had loved his wife and child, but failed to control himself in that fatal moment. After hearing arguments from both sides, the trial panel deliberated and delivered its verdict on November 2, 2011. The final sentence for Lim Chae-won was 10 years in prison, lighter than what prosecutors had requested. The judge explained that although the defendant's conduct was extremely serious, he committed the crime in a state of emotional agitation. The victim's family had also requested leniency, and the defendant had a small child who needed care. This ruling sparked intense controversy. In Vietnam, many people believed 10 years was far too light for such a brutal killing. Some Vietnamese articles even compared it to other cases of Vietnamese women who married into Korea, noting that husbands who killed their wives often received relatively lenient sentences, typically around 10 to 12 years. This left the public questioning whether South Korean law was too lenient toward perpetrators who abused or killed foreign wives. Even so, the South Korean court emphasized that it had weighed many humanitarian and legal factors. The victim's family also did not appeal after the trial. For his part, Lim Chae-won accepted the sentence and did not seek any further reduction. And although the sentence remained unchanged, South Korean authorities repeatedly expressed sorrow for the victim's situation. When Nguyen Thi Hua, the mother of Hoang Thi Nam, came to South Korea to bring her unfortunate daughter home, dozens of senior officials and many Korean citizens dressed in black bowed deeply and apologized right at the airport. After that, a local delegation, including several National Assembly members, leaders of Cheongdo County, and leaders of Gyeongsangbuk Province, knelt before the altar and apologized to the spirit of the Vietnamese bride. Lim Chae-won's parents also appeared timidly. They asked Ms. Hoa for permission to light incense for their daughter-in-law as an act of remorse. Through tears, Lim Chae-won's mother expressed guilt for failing to fulfill her responsibilities as a mother-in-law to Nam and said she was endlessly sorry, my child. On June 8, 2011, the then new South Korean ambassador to Vietnam, Ha Chan-ho, publicly offered condolences and an apology to the victim's family, acknowledging it was a serious and deeply regrettable incident. Meanwhile, the South Korean Consul General in Ho Chi Minh City, Kim Sang-yoon, expressed grief that yet another Vietnamese bride had been killed. He also, on behalf of the South Korean authorities, provided $40,000 to support Nam's family. As for Nam and Lim's child, immediately after the case occurred, the baby was transferred to an orphanage in Gyeongsangbuk Province, South Korea. Later, Nam's family traveled to receive the child and completed procedures to bring the baby to California, the United States, to live with an aunt. Hopefully, that fateful first night of life will not haunt too much of the child's future. And what do you think about today's tragedy of this Vietnamese bride? Is a 10-year sentence for the killer too light? On the afternoon of the 26th of July, 2025, the peaceful Nagahama neighborhood in Higashiyamashiro Ward, Saga Prefecture in southwestern Japan, was shattered by the cries for help of an elderly woman. Covered in blood and clutching a wound on her neck, she ran outside seeking assistance. Nearby residents immediately called the emergency police line, 110. Within minutes, the sound of police sirens and ambulances echoed through the narrow street. But the first responders arriving at the scene could not have imagined the horror awaiting inside the house. When officers forced the door open, an alarming scene appeared in the fading afternoon light. At the entrance, a woman around 40 years old lay motionless. She had suffered multiple injuries, and blood had spread across the floor. Nearby, investigators found her 70-year-old mother, the same woman who had escaped to the neighbor's house, collapsed from blood loss. Paramedics rushed the surviving mother to emergency care while police secured the scene and searched for any trace of the attacker. The perpetrator had already vanished, leaving behind 2 victims and a ransacked home. For investigators, the immediate impression was the suddenness and brutality of the attack. A quiet residential home in broad daylight had become the site of a violent assault. The victim, lying right at the entrance, suggested that the attack was swift, occurring the moment the door opened. The mother's severe injuries also indicated that the assailant targeted both women without hesitation. The crime scene showed signs of struggle and household items disturbed, possibly due to the attacker searching for valuables or during resistance from the victims. Notably, no weapon was found at the scene, indicating that the perpetrator had taken it when fleeing. All evidence pointed toward a likely case of murder accompanied by robbery. Investigators understood they were in a race against time. A dangerous offender was still on the loose, capable of harming innocent people for money. Once the victim's identity was confirmed, the case began to take clearer shape. The woman found at the scene was Mukumoto Maiko, 40 years old, a single Japanese woman and the daughter of the elderly homeowner. She had moved back to live with her mother in Amari to care for her in old age. To neighbors, Maiko was known as a gentle, kind, and responsible person. She had no conflicts with anyone, making her death even more heartbreaking and difficult to comprehend. Professionally, she was an experienced Japanese language teacher in the region. She taught in community Japanese classes for foreign residents and also worked as a freelance translator thanks to her strong language skills. With a compassionate heart, Maiko helped many immigrants overcome language barriers and adjust to life in Japan. Maiko's family included her elderly mother and an older sister who lived elsewhere. The sisters grew up together in Imari and were very close. Upon hearing the devastating news, the older sister rushed home in shock to handle the arrangements. Maiko's friends gathered to support the family, deeply mourning the loss of a kind-hearted woman. They remembered her as modest, dedicated to teaching, and someone who never quarreled with anyone. At the time of the incident, Maiko had simply been spending a quiet weekend afternoon with her mother. They were likely having afternoon tea or preparing a simple early dinner together. No one could have imagined those would be the final peaceful moments of her life. The tragedy stole from her mother a devoted daughter, from her sister a beloved sibling, and from many foreign students a caring teacher. The Amari community grieved profoundly for Maiko, a gentle soul taken away without warning. Looking into her background, police reaffirmed that she had no personal disputes that could have led to the attack. There was no prior connection between her and the assailant. She appeared to be an unfortunate victim targeted by a stranger in a sudden violent act. This truth made the case even more painful, as it underscored how such an incident could happen to anyone through tragic chance. The 70-year-old mother became the key witness. Despite her immense emotional trauma, she tried her best to recount what had happened. According to her, at around 4:20 in the afternoon that day, the doorbell rang. When Maiko opened the door, an unfamiliar man forced his way inside. He threatened them and demanded money. In short, simple Japanese phrases. Maiko was attacked almost immediately, and as the frightened mother rushed to help her daughter, she was also injured. The calm household was thrown into chaos within moments. Based on the mother's fragmented memory, everything happened in just a few minutes. The assailant acted quickly and fled as soon as both women collapsed. He escaped with a small amount of stolen money and the weapon he had used. As soon as he left, the mother gathered the last of her strength to reach the outside and call for help. Her determination not only saved her own life, but also brought the incident to light. The information she provided was extremely valuable. The assailant appeared to be a young man around 20 years old, slim build, with short black hair on the sides, wearing a black t-shirt, brown pants, a face mask, and speaking Japanese imperfectly, possibly a foreign national. She emphasized that she had never met him before. This detail supported the police's early conclusion. This was likely a random attack with the intent to steal, not a targeted killing based on personal grievances. The forensic examination on the night of the 26th of July confirmed that Maiko suffered multiple serious injuries that caused rapid, fatal blood loss. The nature of the wounds suggested the attacker intended to cause severe harm rather than simply intimidate and flee. This escalated the severity of the case, prompting Saga police to mobilize their most experienced units to track down the perpetrator. The scene was secured tightly, and no detail, no matter how small, was overlooked. Forensic specialists carefully collected fingerprints, blood samples, and shoe impressions from the victim's house. Strange fingerprints found on the door handle and several objects were compared against the foreign resident database, as Japan stores fingerprints from all non-Japanese entrants upon arrival. While awaiting results, police urgently reviewed security cameras in the surrounding area. Fortunately, although the neighborhood was semi-rural, some nearby homes and shops had CCTV installed. Footage from the afternoon of the 26th of July was analyzed in detail. As expected, investigators spotted a young man wearing a black shirt moving quickly through a small road shortly after 4:20 in the afternoon, the approximate time of the incident, heading from the victim's home toward the main street. His build and clothing matched the surviving witness's description. Notably, another camera from a nearby residence captured the man heading toward an area with several dormitory blocks used for laborers and trainees. Through this footage, police also identified his escape route from the victim's home, cutting through a narrow alley, crossing a dirt path, and entering a trainee's dormitory complex. Along the way, he deliberately avoided main streets, preventing clear views of his face and evading public cameras. Though risky in broad daylight, the escape showed familiarity with the area. This reinforced the theory that the suspect lived nearby and knew the local pathways well. Investigators grew uneasy at the possibility that the attacker was still living normally within the community. With this crucial clue, Saga police shifted their focus to foreign residents living around the crime scene. Through discussions with local authorities, they learned that about 600 meters from the victim's home was a dormitory for foreign trainees working for a regional agricultural company. This immediately became the central direction of the investigation. A distance of 600 meters, just a few minutes walk, would explain how the perpetrator could disappear so quickly without using any vehicle. It also aligned with the idea that he knew the area well enough to flee without being detected. On the night of the 26th of July and the morning of the 27th of July, officers canvassed the trainee dormitory. A list of foreign men aged 20 to 30 living there was quickly compiled. One name stood out: Dam Du Khang, 24 years old, Vietnamese. His age, physique, and especially his short sides haircut all matched the witness description. According to the dormitory manager, Khang had lived there for more than 2 years and worked for a local agricultural company. Suspicion deepened when investigators learned that Khang had the afternoon of the 26th off. Several coworkers said he had been alone in his room around the time of the incident, meaning he had no solid alibi. Meanwhile, other trainees had been at work or in shared areas with witnesses to confirm their presence. At this point, suspicion focused squarely on Dam Du Khang. By late afternoon on the 27th of July, with indirect evidence mounting, police decided to approach him. At 7:12 in the evening, officers knocked on his dormitory door, requesting his cooperation with the investigation. Confronted by authorities, Khang appeared calm. He voluntarily accompanied officers to the station without handcuffs and without formal charges. With the help of a Vietnamese interpreter, police began preliminary questioning. However, Khang remained distant and silent. Questions about his whereabouts and actions the previous afternoon were met with evasive answers or complete silence. When asked directly, "Do you know anything about the incident at Miss Mukamoto's home?" he simply replied, "I don't want to say anything," and lowered his head. The smooth denial and uncooperative attitude only deepened investigators' suspicion. It increasingly seemed they had identified the right person. Now, they needed direct incriminating evidence. During the night of the 27th and early morning of the 28th of July, police executed an urgent search of Khang's dormitory room. There, decisive evidence emerged: a blood-stained knife found among Khang's belongings. The blade measured about 13.5 centimeters, matching the type associated with the victim's injuries. Forensic testing confirmed the blood belonged to Maiko Mukamoto, and skin DNA recovered from the handle matched Khang's profile. Shoe impressions found at the scene also matched Khang's shoes. Police additionally recovered his black clothing, which had been washed but still retained faint brownish traces suspected to be blood. At the same time, fingerprint comparison returned a perfect match. Moreover, Khang's wallet contained roughly 11,000 yen, determined likely to be the amount taken from the victim's home, totaling about 12,000 yen in all, equivalent to approximately $85. The combined physical evidence now formed a complete picture identifying Dam Du Khang as the perpetrator. At approximately 12:15 a.m. on the 28th of July, the Saga Prefectural Police officially arrested Dam Du Khang on charges of homicide and robbery. Within just 31 hours of the incident, investigators had apprehended the suspect in the community, a remarkably swift resolution that reassured the public. At a dawn press briefing on the 28th of July, a representative of the Saga Police announced, "We have arrested a 24-year-old male trainee of Vietnamese nationality living near the scene for homicide, robbery, and unlawful entry." The suspect's identity was then released: Dam Du Khang, 24. The media reacted strongly. The perpetrator was not an outsider, but someone living just nearby, a foreign trainee integrated into the neighborhood. Residents of Imari were further shocked to learn that the attacker had been living openly among them, passing through familiar streets daily. After his arrest, Khang was taken to the Imari Detention Center for temporary holding and questioning. Throughout this period, he remained silent and refused to answer anything regarding the case. Experienced investigators continued questioning him with interpreter support, but Khang repeatedly responded, "I have nothing to say." By then, objective evidence had already spoken in place of a confession. The bloodstained knife, fingerprints and DNA, and the surviving witness's statement had drawn an unmistakable picture. The case, Khang believed, was perfect, unraveled piece by piece, bringing him to justice. Dam Du Khang, 24 years old, from Vietnam. He had come to Japan under a technical trainee program and had lived in Imari for roughly 2.5 years, within a 3-year labor dispatch contract. In Imari, he worked for an agricultural company, specifically at a vegetable farm on the city's outskirts. His daily work involved harvesting and sorting vegetables inside greenhouses, requiring physical stamina and diligence. According to his supervisors, Khang worked well, was quiet, hardworking, and caused no trouble. His trainee salary was around $1,300 to $1,500 USD per month, enough for frugal living and to send some money home to his family in Vietnam, though certainly not a generous income. He lived with about 6 to 7 other Vietnamese trainees in a dormitory near the farm. That dormitory was only about 600 meters from Maiko's home, a short distance linking two individuals who otherwise had no connection. Regarding his family background, Dam Duy Khang was born into an ordinary working-class family in Vietnam. Like many other young Vietnamese, he dreamed of changing his life by working in Japan. However, to join the trainee program, he had to pay a large brokerage fee, which could reach several thousand USD. In reality, many Vietnamese trainees begin their time in Japan already burdened with this debt, forcing them to work relentlessly for 1 to 2 years just to pay it off. It is unclear whether Khang was in this situation, but investigators suspect financial hardship may have contributed to his reckless decision. In terms of personality, Khang was described by coworkers as quiet and reserved. He rarely socialized, hardly drank, and did not go out much. During his free time, he usually stayed in his room scrolling through social media on his phone. Some roommates said he shared very little about his personal life, so no one was truly close to him. Police are currently analyzing data from Khang's phone and computer to determine whether he experienced psychological pressure or any major emotional changes before the incident. There is no information suggesting he had mental illness or a criminal record in Vietnam. It is likely he had never broken the law before. This case appears to be the first time Khang crossed into criminal behavior. He had no personal relationship with the victim, Maiko Mukumoto. As previously established, Khang was not her student and did not know her family. He simply lived nearby and selected her home as a target. Therefore, this was not a crime driven by personal hatred, but by greed and circumstance. The direct motive was identified as theft for money. However, investigators and criminologists believe the deeper motive may be more complex. Suppressed frustration, hopelessness, or emotional instability stemming from the difficulties of living abroad may have built up over time, pushing him toward losing control. More broadly, Khang is one among tens of thousands of young workers who leave Vietnam for Japan hoping for a better future, but face harsh realities. Demanding labor, low income, high living costs, cultural and language barriers, and at times feelings of isolation or discrimination in a foreign land. These pressures can overwhelm individuals without adequate support. Of course, tens of thousands of others continue working honestly despite these hardships. Only Khang chose the worst possible path. But such circumstances partly explain how a young foreign worker with no criminal past could lose his way so drastically. For this reason, the case is not only a tragedy for the victim's family, but also a tragedy for Khang himself, transforming from an immigrant worker seeking a better life into a criminal whose actions shocked a community far from home. As of the 28th of July, 2025, the case is still in the investigative phase and has not yet entered trial. However, given the overwhelming evidence, Dam Duy Khang will certainly be prosecuted for extremely serious charges: murder, robbery, and unlawful home invasion. Under Japanese law, the crime of murder combined with robbery is among the most severe, carrying a maximum penalty of death or life imprisonment without parole. The Saga Prefectural Prosecutor's Office will likely pursue the highest possible charges, as Khang's actions were violent and brutally ended the victim's life for a despicable motive. Although Khang is exercising his right to remain silent and denies involvement, the physical evidence and eyewitness testimony are overwhelmingly against him. The defense may have few options beyond attempting to mitigate the sentence. They may argue that Khang acted under severe emotional disturbance or impaired judgment due to difficult personal circumstances, hoping to avoid the death penalty. They may also claim that Khang did not initially intend to kill, but only to steal, and that he stabbed in panic, though this argument is unlikely to hold, given the numerous wounds on the victim that clearly indicate murderous intent. Another factor that will certainly be raised in court is the defendant's level of remorse. So far, Khang has shown no regret or apology. If he maintains this attitude, Japanese courts may consider it unfavorable. Conversely, if he eventually admits guilt and expresses remorse, it may serve as a small mitigating factor. However, due to the brutality of the crime, the Japanese public will demand the harshest punishment. The death penalty is entirely possible, especially since the victim was innocent, the motive selfish, and the offender has no exceptional mitigating circumstances. While the final verdict has not been issued, looking at similar cases in Japan, it is likely that Khang will face a very severe sentence. It may be life imprisonment without parole or even the death penalty, depending on his attitude and the court's assessment of the crime's cruelty. Japan is known for having a strict justice system, particularly in murder cases involving robbery. Whatever the outcome, one thing is certain: justice will be served, and the perpetrator will face the consequences he deserves. And you? What do you think Khang's sentence will be in Japan? At 9 a.m. on May 12, 2021, Taipei police suddenly received a report from a middle-aged man. On the other end of the line, he sounded panicked and rushed. He told police that his lover, a Vietnamese woman around 40 years old, surnamed Lee, who lived in an apartment on the 6th floor of a building on Linsen North Road in Zhongshan District, had run into trouble. Earlier, he had been unable to reach her by phone. Sensing that something was wrong, he went to check on her in person, only to discover in horror that Miss Lee was dead on the bathroom tile floor, with a deep wound on her neck caused by a sharp object. Unable to believe what he was seeing, the man reeled and fell backward. A moment later, he regained his composure and immediately shouted for nearby neighbors to call an ambulance, while he reported the case to the police. After receiving the call, authorities were quickly dispatched to the scene. The entrance to the 6th floor of the 12-story building became sealed off and eerily quiet as police cordoned off the area. Investigators noted that Miss Lee's small apartment unit Salaf looked much like the other units along the same corridor. An ordinary wooden door with a bedroom and a separate bathroom inside. However, the metallic stench of blood hit them the moment they stepped through the doorway, and the closer they got to the bathroom, the more overwhelming it became, signaling a deeply tragic death. Inside, the investigative team found Miss Lee's body lying face up on the tile floor, already stiff, surrounded by a pool of blood. The victim had a long, deep wound on her neck, up to 20 centimeters, nearly severing the carotid artery. This also explained why there was so much blood. And it didn't end there. The victim had also suffered dozens of other wounds across her body, mainly concentrated on her chest and arms. Fresh blood was splattered throughout the room, with stains reaching all the way up to the ceiling above the bathtub, evidence of the killer's cold-blooded brutality. Police also noticed one detail. The blood traces on the floor were fainter and more diluted than those on the ceiling and surrounding walls, signs that he had likely tried to use water to wipe the floor clean. Based on those details, police quickly concluded that the killer acted with extreme brutality, yet also in a hurry, leaving bloodstained traces everywhere. The investigative team therefore hoped the perpetrator would slip up and leave behind fingerprints or some form of DNA. In addition, there were no signs of forced entry on the outer door, and nearby residents reported no unusual sounds of a break-in. For that reason, police suspected this was a targeted attack, and that the perpetrator must have been someone the victim knew close enough and trusted enough to be invited inside while she was alone. Following that investigative direction, Taipei police understood that the top priority was to confirm the victim's identity and map out her circle of relationships. Only then could they narrow down suspects and tighten the scope of the investigation. Since the person who reported the case was an acquaintance, police did not take long to trace leads about the deceased. The victim, surnamed Lee, was Vietnamese. However, due to the sensitive nature of the case, both the media and the police did not disclose her full name. Notably, police also found that the victim's immigration and travel records were far from transparent. Miss Lee had previously come to Taiwan as a manual laborer around 2015, but by 2018 she had fled her workplace and was deported back to Vietnam. Then, about 1 year before the murder, she returned to Taiwan through illegal immigration channels and rented the apartment on Linsen North Road. There, Miss Lee operated a private massage business inside the apartment. In reality, it followed a one downstairs, one upstairs model, a term commonly used in Taiwan to refer to sexual services disguised as massage. This work, along with Miss Lee's status, was entirely illegal, so she typically served only regular customers. She could not advertise or put up a sign. Clients came through word of mouth and quietly visited the apartment, and naturally, most of her customers were men. Miss Lee was also described as introverted and detached, living a closed-off life and never having conflicts with others, partly due to her personality, and partly because she was residing illegally and therefore avoided contact with authorities. Before the murder, Miss Lee had arranged to go to a temple with her lover on the morning of May 12th. But when her boyfriend arrived that morning, he found only her cold, blood-covered body in the bathroom. Even though the deceased's status and line of work were hardly something to be proud of, the heartbreaking incident still left the Vietnamese community in Taipei deeply shaken. This was also a case that, if handled poorly, could spark public anxiety about immigration issues, so the police had to be both cautious and urgent in turning over every clue in the investigation. First, Taipei's criminal police worked with the Criminal Investigation Division to swiftly photograph, measure, and collect evidence at the scene. The initial examination report showed that the victim had suffered more than 20 severe wounds, 17 of which were concentrated around the neck. This indicated the killer's strong intent to take the victim's life. The forensic autopsy confirmed that Miss Lee died from acute blood loss. Police also recorded multiple unfamiliar fingerprints on the doorknob and the bathroom sink. To seize every chance of solving the case, they collected all of these traces and also used swabs to gather every possible DNA sample from the bloodstains on the floor, bringing everything back to the lab for analysis. In addition, with help from the victim's lover, police discovered that Miss Lee's phone, handbag, and some of her jewelry had been taken. With that, the signs of a robbery that escalated into murder became clear. After attacking the victim, the killer rummaged through her belongings, grabbed her handbag, and hurriedly fled. But who would target the property of an illegal immigrant service worker like Miss Lee? To answer that question, another investigative team was assigned to review security camera footage from the building and surrounding areas. From the video they obtained, they noticed an unknown man entering Miss Lee's apartment at around 8 p.m. the previous evening. He stayed for nearly 1 hour before leaving. After that, no one else entered or exited the apartment until her boyfriend arrived. The man who left appeared to be middle-aged, wearing a cap and a light-colored top. Based on the fingerprint evidence and the video, police quickly narrowed in on a suspect. A regular customer who had previously visited Miss Lee's massage business. This hypothesis became even stronger when detectives, using the victim's phone number, uncovered a contact history between Miss Lee and a suspicious man. The two had known each other for a long time. Even shortly before the murder, they were still in frequent contact, exchanging flirtatious, suggestive messages. This lead also helped police reinforce their initial reasoning. The killer was someone Miss Lee knew, not a random thug. By this point, the evidence had been fully assembled, and police were confident in identifying the main suspect as Pan Bing-siu, a Taiwanese national born in 1984 who worked as a food delivery driver, what we commonly call a shipper in Taipei. According to records, Pan was divorced, had 2 young daughters, and lived with his elderly mother. More importantly, he had a prior record related to controlled substances. However, on his personal page, Pan Bing-siu frequently posted photos proudly featuring his ex-wife and family as if there had never been a separation. In reality, he was financially desperate. His monthly income was only around 40 to 50,000 new Taiwan dollars, while he was heavily addicted to entertainment services. Because of that, he had also burned through a considerable amount of money on Miss Lee. On May 12th, just a few hours after the victim's body was discovered, police launched a manhunt for Pan Bing-siu. They found that he was still at his home in Tundian District, New Taipei City. That same evening, officers moved in quickly and arrested him. At first, Pan Bing-siu reflexively denied all accusations. He claimed that at the time the victim was harmed, he had merely been delivering food to that area by coincidence. But police quickly pointed out that delivery data from the night of May 11th showed no orders anywhere near Miss Lee's location. He then claimed it was an attack carried out in a fit of anger, saying Miss Lee had slapped him twice. That excuse didn't hold up for long either, because Miss Lee was running a service business and, under normal circumstances, would be expected to cater to customers hardly the type to swing a hand across a client's face. In the end, as each piece of evidence was presented for confrontation, including CCTV images, fingerprints, and phone data, Pan Bing-siu had no choice but to bow his head and confess, admitting everything he had done. According to the suspect, because he was short on money, he developed a dark plan. His target was none other than Miss Lee. After using her services many times, he knew she lived alone, with no acquaintances in Taiwan. Moreover, because she was an illegal immigrant, he believed that even if she were attacked, she would not dare report it to the police. Putting the plan into action, on May 11th, he bought a kitchen knife normally used for peeling fruit and then went to meet Miss Lee. When he arrived at the apartment, Pan Bingshu was warmly welcomed because it was an arranged meeting between the two of them. And since he was a regular customer, Miss Lee was not on guard at all. At first, the two talked normally and even ate noodles together cheerfully, and they were physically intimate as well. But Pan Bingshu did not forget his main purpose for coming. Taking advantage of a moment when Miss Lee was not paying attention, he turned to rummage through her wallet. Miss Lee noticed. Furious, she swung her hand and slapped him in the face twice, sending him into an uncontrollable rage. Immediately afterward, Pan Bingshu used the knife he had brought and attacked Miss Lee with more than 20 fatal strikes. After committing the crime, Pan Bingshu picked up the victim's handbag, which contained 3,500 new Taiwan dollars and a gold necklace, then got on his motorbike and fled. On the way back, Pan Bingshu threw the murder weapon into a roadside trash bin along Roosevelt Road. Soon after, police went to the spot he indicated and recovered the knife. After examining the bloodstains and matching them with the victim's wounds, forensic investigators confirmed that this was the weapon used to kill Miss Lee. Notably, even after committing such a horrific crime, Pan Bingshu was still able to remain calm and continue his food delivery work as usual the next morning. On May 12th, Pan was making a delivery when he sideswiped a car in the Ton Dien area, scraping both of his arms. However, he stated that he would compensate the car owner later and quickly left the scene without notifying the police. During questioning, Pan Bingshu consistently appeared indifferent. When pressed about his motive, he lowered his head in silence, and in the end only admitted that he had tried to attack the victim to rob her after being discovered. However, investigators believe this was a calculated murder, not merely an impulsive act in a moment of desperation. After all, Pan Bingshu had come prepared with a knife and had been watching Miss Lee since the previous night. Although the suspect's statement still contained many unclear points, especially regarding motive, police could only infer that he may not have intended to kill the victim from the outset. Driven by debt and living expenses, he likely planned to stage a meeting and then steal money. The reason he chose Miss Lee was also easy to understand. Her work and immigration status were illegal in Taipei, so even if she were stolen from, she would not dare call the police. Carrying a weapon was merely a plan B, meaning if the theft failed, he would switch to threats and robbery. But while he was searching through her belongings, Pan Bingshu was discovered by the victim and physically confronted as a warning, which made him explode in fury and become determined to kill her to silence her completely. From here, the pieces of the overall picture were almost complete. Taipei police successfully reconstructed the entire sequence of events. On the night of May 11th, 2021, Pan Bingshu made thorough preparations before meeting Miss Lee. A few hours earlier, he had stopped by a convenience store to buy a fruit-cutting knife. At around 8 p.m., Pan Bingshu finished a food delivery by motorbike and then went to Miss Lee's apartment on Linsen North Road. The two had arranged to meet. Pan Bingshu pretended that he only wanted to eat noodles and talk, asking for nothing more in order to conceal his real intent. Miss Lee trusted him and opened the door, letting Pan Bingshu into the bedroom. They started talking and then moved into the bathroom area to use the additional services. During that time, Pan Bingshu approached a corner table and secretly took Miss Lee's wallet to check how much money was inside. Miss Lee noticed and slapped Pan Bingshu in the face twice, causing him to lose control in anger. He immediately pulled out the knife he had prepared. After a frenzied assault, Miss Lee collapsed, unconscious, and ultimately died in a large pool of blood. Pan Bingshu then remained calm and continued searching the room. He took the wallet, the mobile phone, and even the gold bracelet from the victim's wrist. At around 9 p.m., Pan Bingshu left the apartment on his motorbike, calm and unhurried. He pulled over along nearby Roosevelt Road to dispose of the weapon. After that, he went home to shower, clean the blood off his hands and clothes, and then continued delivering food as if nothing had happened. But that composure could not conceal his guilt. In the end, he was caught and brought to justice in less than 24 hours after the crime. The case of the Vietnamese woman who was attacked in her apartment was quickly transferred to the Taipei District Prosecutor's Office for indictment on charges of homicide committed in the course of robbery. In June 2022, the Taipei District Court opened the first instance trial. At the hearing, prosecutors presented the full body of evidence, including the perpetrator's confession, crime scene photos, forensic examination results, security camera footage, the receipt for purchasing the knife, and photos documenting the victim's injuries. The forensic unit also disclosed in detail that the wound on the victim's neck was as deep as 20 centimeters and that the artery had nearly been severed, demonstrating the extreme savagery of the killer. Pan Bingsiu's defense argued that he was attacked first by the victim and therefore lost control, while also deliberately suggesting a theory that Pan Bingsiu had lost awareness due to mental illness. His lawyer even requested a psychiatric evaluation to determine whether Pan Bingsiu suffered from intermittent loss of control. However, the judge did not accept these unreasonable appeals. In July 2022, the Taipei District Court issued a firm ruling. The defendant confessed to all charges, yet his attitude during questioning was not sincere. The act was exceptionally cruel and premeditated, carried out with disregard for the fatal consequence. Although the defendant claims he was physically provoked first, in fact, he had prepared the weapon and had time to commit the crime, indicating prior intent. Therefore, the court sentenced Pan Bingsiu to life imprisonment and deprived him of civil rights for life. Pan Bingsiu did not accept the verdict and immediately appealed to the Taiwan High Court. However, at the appellate hearing, all evidence was upheld. In February 2023, the High Court in Taipei upheld the first instance judgment and again sentenced Pan to life imprisonment. The defendant appealed once more, seeking to bring the case to the Supreme Court. The final hearing took place in September 2023. The Supreme Court's decision on September 21, 2023 affirmed all prior rulings and rejected Pan's appeal. As a result, the life sentence was finalized, and Pan Bingsiu ultimately had to spend the rest of his life in prison with no further chance of freedom. The case file concluded with the harshest sentence available under Taiwan's current criminal code. This horrific case sent shockwaves through Taiwanese public opinion regarding the safety of migrant workers, especially those who are undocumented, like Miss Lee. The crime scene was on Linsen North Road in Zhongshan District, an area that mixes offices and hotels with many adult entertainment venues. For that reason, it has become known as a professional red light district within Taiwan, drawing large numbers of male customers seeking nighttime entertainment. And among the thousands of workers serving in the area, not a few come from Vietnam. In fact, according to figures released in early 2022, nearly 20,000 Vietnamese workers came to Taiwan in 2021 alone, the highest number among all labor exporting countries. Most Vietnamese workers in Taiwan are women, taking jobs in healthcare, domestic work, or even working under the table in illegal sectors such as the red light trade. However, because of language barriers and because many are undocumented migrants, they often fear contact with authorities. As a result, their rights and protective safeguards remain uncertain and unresolved. In that context, the perpetrator exploited the situation to harm the victim before anyone could react. And although very little private information about the victim was ever made public, the case is still remembered as a heartbreaking lesson. Migrant workers also deserve society's protection and vigilance, even with people you know is never unnecessary. What thoughts does this tragic case leave you with? Let Vietnamese Case Files know in the comments. And if you found today's story compelling, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files so you can keep following more gripping stories in the future. Goodbye and see you next time.